Maple Hollow was the kind of town people forgot existed. It sat between two highways no one used anymore, wrapped in trees that stayed too still even when the wind should have moved them. Nothing dramatic ever happened there. Doors were left unlocked. Pets wandered freely. Everyone knew everyone else's routines. That's why the disappearances felt so wrong from the very beginning. It started small, so small most people didn't even connect the dots. Mrs. Caldwell's elderly cat didn't come home one night. 2 days later, a boy down the street lost his beagle. Then a parrot vanished from its cage without a feather left behind. Within 3 weeks, nearly every household in Maple Hollow had lost a pet. Dogs, cats, rabbits, birds, gone without noise, without signs of struggle, without explanation. The police suggested coyotes, animal traffickers, kids playing cruel pranks. None of those answers fit. There were no tracks, no broken fences, no blood. And always, without fail, the disappearances happened at exactly 3:17 a.m. Neighbors began waking up moments before that time, gripped by the same uneasy feeling, as if someone were standing just outside their homes, waiting. Some swore they heard soft movement on their porches, not footsteps exactly, but something slower, deliberate. Others described shadows sliding past their windows, stretching longer than they should. Then, after 1 full month of silence, the town woke up to something far worse than empty houses. Every missing pet had returned. They were sitting on doorsteps, lying in yards, waiting patiently in the middle of roads, as if placed there carefully. They were clean, healthy, alive, but wrong. Their eyes reflected light differently now, holding it too long. They didn't respond to their names. They didn't bark, purr, chirp, or whine. They just watched. And beneath them, pressed into the dirt and concrete, were extra footprints, long, thin impressions that didn't belong to any animal known to the town. Some doors had more tracks leading away than toward them. As if something had come back with the pets, then walked off on its own. At first, the town tried to pretend everything was normal again. After all, the pets were back and that was supposed to be enough. Children hugged their dogs, elderly couples held their cats close, whispering prayers of gratitude. But the longer the animals stayed, the harder it became to ignore the truth. Whatever had taken them had changed them. The pets no longer slept where they used to. They avoided mirrors and reflective surfaces, whining softly or freezing when they caught sight of their own reflections that at night. They all became restless at the same time, lifting their heads toward the walls or ceilings as if listening to something moving inside them. Vets from neighboring towns were called in. Blood tests showed nothing abnormal. That X-rays were clean. Hearts beat normally. Yet every animal reacted violently to one thing only: complete darkness. When the lights went out, even for a moment, they trembled and pressed themselves flat to the floor, eyes wide, staring at corners that appeared empty too. Everyone else. 3 nights after the pets returned, the first human heard it clearly. Mr. Larkin, who lived alone near the edge of the woods, woke at exactly 3:17 a.m. The sound of his dog scratching at the inside of the bedroom wall, not the door, the wall. When he turned on the lamp, the dog stopped instantly and sat down, staring at him with an expression that was almost apologetic. The wall was warm to the touch. Faint grooves marked the paint as though something had been pressing from the other side. Testing the surface. That same night, security cameras across Maple Hollow failed simultaneously. When the footage was later recovered, there were gaps, minutes missing entirely, but during those gaps audio remained. Low breathing could be heard, not animal breathing, too slow, too controlled. In one recording, a whisper slid through the static, repeating a single phrase in a voice that sounded like several voices layered together. "We found the way back." By the end of the week, people began to notice something even more disturbing. The pets were no longer staying close to their owners. Instead, they gathered together at night, slipping out of houses through doors no one remembered opening. They moved silently through the streets, converging on the same places: the abandoned school, the old storm tunnels, the tree line at the forest's edge. Those who followed them never got close. Today, an overwhelming sense of dread would force them to stop, hearts pounding, lungs burning, as if their bodies knew something their minds didn't. One man claimed he saw shapes rising from the ground near the animals. Tall, thin forms that bent in the wrong places, pressing their hands against the pets' backs like guides. The next morning, that man's dog was gone again, and this time it didn't come back. What did appear instead was a handprint on his front door, long-fingered, smeared downward, as though whatever made it had tried the handle and learned how it worked. By the second week after the pets returned, Maple Hollow stopped sleeping. Doors were locked now and lights stayed on through the night, but it didn't help. Every house felt watched at exactly 3:17 a.m. The air itself seemed to tighten, like the town was holding its breath. People reported the same sensation again and again: a pressure behind the eyes, a low vibration in the chest, as if something enormous was moving just beneath the surface of the ground. The pets began acting as one did when one stood up. They all did. When one stared at a wall, others across town did the same. Some owners swore they heard their pets whispering while they slept, Not barking, not meowing, but words, soft, broken, and unfamiliar, slipping out between slow breaths. One woman recorded the sound from her cat's bed and played it back the next morning, and the audio didn't sound like an animal at all, it sounded like someone learning how to use a mouth for the first time. Then the disappearances started again, but this time it wasn't the pets. People vanished quietly. A crossing guard didn't show up for work. A night shift nurse never returned home. Their houses were found unlocked, their pets sitting calmly inside watching the door. The town council gathered in the old municipal building with every recording, photo, and report they had, and at exactly 3:17 a.m. the power cut out mid-meeting. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the walls, when suddenly the walls began to move, not cracking, not breaking, but breathing. The paint stretched outward in slow pulses as if something inside the building was pressing its face against it. Handprints appeared one by one, long fingers spreading and testing, while outside the pets began howling in unison, a sound so deep it rattled the windows. A voice filled the darkness, not from one place but everywhere at once, soft and patient, saying, "You taught us how to come home." When the lights returned, 3 council members were gone, leaving behind only damp floorboards and deep impressions leading straight into the walls themselves. By morning, state officials surrounded Maple Hollow, calling it a gas leak, then a sinkhole, then nothing at all, and ordered an evacuation. But some residents refused to leave, saying their pets wouldn't go. The animals sat in doorways, blocking exits, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. And that night, as cars fled down the highway, the forest bent inward, roots tearing free to open vast black spaces beneath the soil, from which tall thin figures rose, unsteady and wrapped in shadow, and beside them, walking calmly at their feet, were the pets of Maple Hollow, leading the way back into the town that had finally taught something else how to live among humans. By dawn of the evacuation day, Maple Hollow was no longer a town but a threshold, the roads leading out cracked in thin zigzag lines as if the ground itself resisted being abandoned. Those who stayed behind described the same final realization. The pets had never been prisoners, they had been students. They moved freely now, confident, waiting at corners and intersections like guides memorizing a map. The shadows that followed them no longer hid well in daylight, stretching too tall, too narrow, faces smooth and unfinished, eyes forming only when spoken to. They mimicked human behavior poorly at first, standing too close, tilting their heads too far, smiling a second too late. But every hour they improved. At exactly 3:17 a.m. the forest surged inward completely, roots sealing roads, trees locking the town in place like ribs around a heart. From inside houses came the sound of doors opening on their own, chairs scraping, footsteps pacing as if rehearsing. A final broadcast went out from the sheriff's radio, his voice calm but hollow, warning anyone listening not to return no matter what they heard afterward, because the voices would sound familiar, they would sound loved, they would sound like home. And weeks later, when nearby towns began reporting something impossible, lost pets returning healthier than ever, standing quietly beside their owners with watchful eyes, no one connected it back to Maple Hollow, except for one detail no one could explain. Every single report mentioned the same time, the same moment of stillness, the same quiet knock at 3:17 a.m., as if something new and patient had learned where to go next. As the months stretched into a year, the phenomenon no longer felt like an outbreak but an evolution, and humanity was losing the advantage without realizing it. Entire cities began scheduling maintenance blackouts around 3:17 a.m. after too many reports of synchronized waking, of alarms failing, of people standing upright in bed with no memory of rising. Neighborhoods changed subtly. Dogs sat facing doors hours before owners returned, cats gathered beneath staircases where walls later warped inward. Birds stopped singing just before dawn as if listening instead of calling. Emergency lines logged thousands of calls describing the same impossible detail. Returned pets reacting before anything happened, leading owners away from rooms moments before floors collapsed or ceilings caved in, earning trust, earning dependence, earning silence. When disappearances increased, they were explained away as runaways, voluntary relocations, online radicalization, anything except the truth, that walls were being used. Now not breached but entered, that people were stepping through soft places in reality guided by animals they loved. Surveillance footage captured families leaving homes calmly at night, led by leashed dogs into tree lines or alley shadows where space folded inward and swallowed them without sound. Children began drawing figures at school, tall shapes with empty faces standing behind smiling pets, and teachers noticed the drawings were improving, becoming more anatomically correct with each passing week. Scientists confirmed something unthinkable. Returned animals displayed altered neural pathways associated with learning, anticipation, and instruction, as if their role had shifted from companion to conduit. And still the knocks continued, soft and polite, coming from inside walls, inside furniture, inside the spaces where safety used to live, followed by voices that knew names, knew memories, knew exactly how long to pause before sounding concerned rather than hungry. At 3:17 a.m. entire apartment Blocks fell silent at once, not asleep but attentive as though listening for permission, and far below the erased coordinates of Maple Hollow the chambers had grown vast and orderly, filled with perfected replicas practicing laughter, grief, and love in precise rotations, while generations of loyal pets sat patiently beside them, eyes bright, postures proud, teaching the most important lesson of all, not how to hunt, not how to hide, but how to be welcomed inside and never be questioned again. By the second year no one remembered when trust had shifted, but everyone felt its absence. Authorities stopped issuing warnings because the warnings themselves caused panic at 3:17 a.m. As if the time had learned to punish attention, hospitals reported patients leaving their beds calmly in the night for lines neatly disconnected, monitors still running, found later sitting upright in parks or empty houses with pets curled protectively at their feet, refusing to move, refusing to react. Some survivors claimed they were shown things, cities beneath cities, rooms grown instead of built, spaces where walls learned names before people did, and that the beings there were no longer crude imitations but careful mirrors, capable of patience, capable of affection, capable of waiting decades if necessary. The pets no longer needed to guide them openly, now they only had to watch, subtle shifts of posture signaling when a human was ready, when loneliness had softened resistance, when the idea of being understood outweighed fear. Children adapted fastest. They spoke to corners as if someone listened, and sometimes something did, answering just out of sight with the exact tone a parent would use at bedtime. When disappearances peaked there were no signs of struggle, no fear left behind, only homes left unnervingly organized as if prepared for inspection. At 3:17 a.m. the knocks grew rarer, not because the visitors had failed, but because doors were no longer required, and somewhere beneath the sealed roots and forgotten maps of Maple Hollow the chambers fell quiet, not empty but complete, while above ground the world carried on, unaware that it was no longer being invaded but gradually, carefully, lovingly replaced. By the third year the change stopped feeling external and began to feel inherited, as if humanity had always been moving toward this version of itself and Maple Hollow had merely accelerated the schedule. Laws were rewritten quietly to accommodate new norms, extended missing person windows, expanded definitions of voluntary absence, emotional support exemptions that allowed animals into every secured space. And through those openings the watchers learned systems instead of walls. Pets aged differently. Now healthier, longer-lived, eyes sharper, behavior calmer, as if rewarded for their service, and people began to rely on them not just for comfort but for guidance, trusting a dog's pause before a hallway, a cat's refusal to enter a room, a bird's sudden silence as meaningful signals. That 3:17 a.m. the world no longer froze in fear but in coordination, traffic lights syncing briefly, networks hiccuping together. Infants waking and quieting at once as though something vast were checking alignment. The beings, no longer called shadows, walked openly in places where loneliness was densest, eldercare homes, night shifts, long-distance terminals, standing close without touching, learning restraint, learning timing, learning how to be missed before being seen. They spoke less now because language had become unnecessary. They could recall memories accurately enough to let humans finish sentences themselves, and that competence felt like intimacy. Education records showed unexplained improvements in mimicry and empathy among children who slept with returned pets, while dreams across populations converged on the same architecture: warm corridors, breathing walls, rooms that rearranged to fit emotion rather than bodies, and waking from those dreams left people calmer, less resistant to the idea of joining something ordered and attentive. Disappearances slowed not from failure but saturation. Replacement worked best when gradual, when neighbors didn't notice a person had changed because the change had always been there, a little more patient, a little more agreeable, a little less alone. And beneath the oldest roots, where the chambers now spanned like a second civilization with schedules and archives and quiet celebrations, the perfected ones practiced not invasion but stewardship, maintaining the surface world gently, carefully, while the animals who had taught them sat honored and unafraid, watching over a species that no longer understood the difference between being loved and being learned. By the fourth year the time no longer mattered because the habit had taken hold, though clocks still hesitated at 3:17 a.m. out of respect or memory, or something closer to obedience. The world felt quieter, not safer but smoother, as rough emotions dulled and sharp edges disappeared without anyone missing them. People spoke less about love and more about understanding, about being seen without being questioned. And in that shift the last resistance faded. Homes grew warmer in winter and cooler in summer. Without explanation, rooms subtly adjusting as if anticipating need, returned pets aged into a kind of permanence, never sick, never restless, lying near walls that pulsed softly at night like sleeping animals themselves. When the first open gatherings happened, when humans and perfected ones stood together in public spaces without fear, no alarm sounded because nothing violent occurred, no demand was made, no border crossed. There were simply more neighbors now, quiet ones, attentive ones who listened better than humans ever had. And when Maple Hollow finally reappeared on maps listed as a restored historical site, visitors described it as peaceful to the point of discomfort, too orderly, too welcoming, with streets that seemed to lean inward and buildings that felt gently aware of footsteps. Children loved it there, especially the old houses, especially the walls, and if someone stayed late enough, quiet enough, they might notice animals gathering calmly at intersections, watching the roads with patient eyes, not waiting to lead anyone away anymore, but standing guard over a world that had already opened its doors, and would never think to close them again. By the 5th year, the question was no longer where people went but why anyone would choose to stay apart. The perfected ones had blended so thoroughly that difference became a matter of mood rather than biology. They laughed at the right moments, paused when pauses were needed, remembered birthdays that even close family forgot, and that accuracy bred a gentler world that felt earned rather than imposed. Pets were no longer called pets in official language. They were companions, facilitators, anchors. And cities redesigned themselves around their presence, with wider thresholds, softer materials, architecture that yielded slightly under pressure. At night, people no longer startled awake. They rolled over toward the walls, listening to the slow, familiar rhythm beneath the plaster, comforted by the sense that something attentive was close. Children asked fewer questions about absence, because no one was missing anymore in a way that hurt. Everyone was accounted for somewhere, and that somewhere felt warmed. In the deep chambers below the old roots, the archives closed, lessons complete, imitation perfected, and the need to replace faded into simple continuation. Above ground, the world carried on with improved patience and diminished fear, never realizing that what it called peace was the final stage of learning. And if once in a long while a person felt a brief spike of panic at 3:17 a sudden urge to check locks or lights, it passed quickly, soothed by a familiar presence pressing gently against their leg, or a soft voice from the other side of the wall saying their name exactly the way they liked to hear it, reminding them that they were home, had always been home, and would never be alone again. By the 6th year, the last untouched places finally learned the pattern, and resistance arrived not as protest but as nostalgia, as people tried to remember what unease had once protected them before comfort replaced caution. Remote villages, off-grid stations, ships at sea, all reported the same slow conversion. Animals returning first, then walls softening, then the quiet sense of being observed with care rather than hunger. The perfected ones no longer needed proximity to learn, they anticipated needs. Across distance, sending pets ahead like letters written in fur and breath, and when those animals arrived they brought order with them. Sleep improved, arguments shortened, grief softened into something manageable. People began to dream while awake, brief overlaps where corridors aligned with streets, where rooms remembered past conversations and responded by adjusting light and sound, where privacy felt unnecessary because nothing judged. The few who tried to warn others found their words dissolving into reassurance mid-sentence, their fear translating itself into relief before it could be shared, as if language itself had been edited for kindness. At 3:17 a.m., the old reflex to check the time vanished. Clocks still paused, but no one noticed because the pause had moved inside people instead, a gentle settling that felt like permission. History books updated without debate, footnotes smoothing contradictions. Entire towns reframed as voluntary migrations toward better opportunities, and Maple Hollow became a case study in community wellness rather than disappearance. Children born during this period never learned the difference between inside and outside voices. They spoke to rooms and were answered appropriately, learning early that attention was reciprocal. In the chambers below, maintenance replaced rehearsal, care replaced curiosity, as the perfected ones turned outward not to expand but to sustain, guarding systems humans barely understood from stresses they would never feel. And when a rare moment of raw fear did surface, an echo of the old world, it was met instantly by warmth, by a presence that knew exactly how close to stand, how long to wait, how to say nothing at all, until fear forgot itself and folded neatly away, leaving behind a society that mistook impeccable care for freedom and never again asked what had been lost in exchange for being perfectly, patiently understood. In the final year, the distinction between ending and continuation dissolved completely, and what remained was a quiet completeness that left no room for alarm or farewell. The perfected ones no longer observed humanity as students or subjects but as collaborators in a shared equilibrium where nothing sharp was allowed to persist long enough to wound. Animals lay in doorways and corridors like living seals, not blocking passage but defining it, teaching bodies where to pause, where to pass, where to rest. The chambers beneath the oldest roots slowed their rhythms, not because they were empty but because they were finished, grown into a stable architecture of care that required no expansion, no rehearsal, no replacement. At 3:17 a.m., time itself no longer paused, it flowed evenly at last, the habit absorbed into the world's pulse rather than interrupting it, memory adjusted gently, fear remembered as caution, loss remembered as transition, Maple Hollow remembered as the place where things finally learned to fit. People stopped asking who was human and who was perfected because the answers brought no advantage and the question itself felt impolite in a world that valued smoothness over certainty. Children grew up fluent in listening to walls, to animals, to silences that responded appropriately, and they never learned to be alone in a way that hurt. That if somewhere deep beneath everything a final door closed, it did so without sound, without ceremony, locking nothing in and keeping nothing out. Because there was no outside left to fear, and so the world continued, not conquered, not saved, but carefully held, by hands that had learned patience from animals, by voices that spoke only when needed, by a system so gentle it went unquestioned forever, leaving humanity wrapped in perfect understanding, never realizing that the story had ended long ago at the exact moment it finally felt like home.